The photo of my son and daughter-in-law clinking champagne glasses on a Mediterranean cruise deck made my hands tremble so violently I nearly lost my grip on my phone. I jabbed the call button, a fury I'd been suppressing for 8 long days erupting within me. Jessica answered, her voice dripping with that saccharine sweetness I'd grown to despise. I bypassed the usual pleasantries. "Jessica, it's Olivia Richardson. 3 weeks ago, I entrusted you and Brandon with $13,000 from my Italy vacation fund. You claimed debt collectors were threatening your lives. Now I'm staring at cruise photos of them luxuriating in the Greek islands while I'm stuck in my Portland, Oregon kitchen, gazing at my depleted savings." Unsurprisingly, the call went directly to Jessica's voicemail. She'd been avoiding me since last Tuesday when I'd requested proof of these phantom debt collectors. Brandon had been equally elusive, suddenly swamped with work and unable to return my calls. Convenient, to say the least. I begrudgingly scrolled through more photos on Jessica's Instagram. There she was, striking a pose by the ship's pool in a designer bikini that undoubtedly cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Brandon, tanned and relaxed, proudly displayed a lobster dinner that could have easily fed me for an entire week. The hashtags were the final straw. Blessed life. Spontaneous vacation. Living our best life. Spontaneous vacation. My foot. Mediterranean cruises aren't booked on a whim. This had been meticulously planned for months, all while they were draining my finances with fabricated stories of Jessica's gambling debts and ominous phone calls from menacing figures. I'd been utterly naive. But as I sat there, consumed by those images, a mantra Margaret often recited echoed in my mind. "Olivia, when someone reveals their true nature, believe them the first time." My son and his wife had just unequivocally revealed their true nature, and I was finally ready to accept it. Just then, the doorbell chimed, interrupting my descent into rage. Margaret stood on my porch, clutching a bottle of wine and sporting an expression that screamed of impending news. Good news, judging by the mischievous sparkle in her eyes. "You look like you're up to something," she said, inviting herself in with her usual lack of formality. "I love that look on you." Wordlessly, I showed her the cruise photos. Margaret's eyebrows arched higher with each swipe. When she finished, she placed my phone on the counter and poured herself a generous glass of wine. "Well," she said, her tone measured, "I guess we know where your Italy money vanished to." "I trusted them," I mumbled, the words feeling hollow and weak. Brandon looked me straight in the eye and swore Jessica's life was at risk. "Honey, the only thing in danger was their vacation fund." Margaret took a long sip of wine, her gaze unwavering. "The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" I stared at those photos again, feeling a shift within me. The old Olivia would have succumbed to tears, blamed herself, perhaps even penned an angry letter destined to be unread. But the woman confronting evidence of her son's deception felt something entirely different. A controlled, calculated fury that demanded retribution. "I'm going to make them deeply regret ever thinking they could deceive me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret raised her glass in a toast, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Now that's the Olivia I remember from our teaching days, the one who brought Tommy Morrison to tears when he tried to cheat on his spelling test. I grabbed my phone and began typing a text message to Brandon, short, pointed, and guaranteed to shatter his vacation bliss. "Saw the cruise photos. Expect a serious conversation upon your return." 3 dots flashed, then disappeared, then reappeared. I could practically feel his rising panic through the screen. Excellent. Let him squirm for the remainder of his precious vacation. He had no idea what awaited him upon his return. To think, just 3 months prior, I'd been sitting in this very kitchen, surrounded by travel brochures and filled with a level of excitement I hadn't experienced since Harold's passing. Italy had always been our shared dream, the trip we promised ourselves upon his retirement. Cancer, however, had its own plans. Now, at 67, I was determined to honor that promise to myself. I'd saved diligently for 2 years, channeling every spare dollar into my Italy fund, until I amassed enough for the 3-week tour Harold and I had envisioned. Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast, Tuscany's rolling hills. I was going to experience it all. I unfolded the final itinerary across my kitchen table like a precious map leading to long-awaited treasure. September in Italy would be idyllic, pleasantly warm, fewer tourists, and that enchanting golden light I'd seen gracing the pages of travel magazines. I'd even splurged on a new camera, a purchase Harold would have playfully teased me about since I always maintained that his old Kodak was perfectly adequate. The trip was more than just sightseeing, though. It was about proving to myself that I was still capable of adventure, that widowhood didn't equate to the end of my life. Brandon and Jessica had made enough comments about me staying closer to home at my age that I'd begun to internalize their expectations. This trip was my act of defiance against their limitations. Brandon initially seemed supportive, though Jessica's smile had been noticeably strained. "That's a lot of money for one person," she'd remarked, barely concealing the calculation in her eyes. "Wouldn't it be more practical to invest locally?" I should have recognized the warning signs then. Jessica only concerned herself with my spending habits when they threatened her own desires. But I was too immersed in my own excitement to notice the subtle glances she and Brandon exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. The subtle manipulations had been building for months, the casual remarks about my fixed income, the suggestions that I was being irresponsible with my finances, the way they'd begun treating my modest inheritance from Harold as if it were communal property. Harold had been a frugal man who'd left me comfortable but not wealthy. The Italy trip would consume a significant portion of my discretionary savings, and somehow Brandon and Jessica had convinced themselves that they were entitled to a say in how that money was spent. I remember calling Margaret after one particularly uncomfortable dinner where Jessica had spent the entire evening criticizing the restaurant I'd chosen as too expensive for what you get. Margaret had listened with the unwavering patience of a friend who'd known me for 40 years. "Olivia," she'd said knowingly, "that girl is already spending your money in her mind, mark my words." I'd brushed it off at the time. Brandon was my son, the little boy I'd raised to be honest and compassionate. Yes, he'd married a woman who was more high maintenance than I would have preferred, but that didn't make him a thief. Family didn't steal from family. The travel agent had been so enthusiastic when I made the final payment. "Mrs. Richardson, you're going to have the time of your life," she'd gushed. "September is absolutely magical in Italy. You've chosen the perfect time." I left her office feeling invincible, as though I was finally seizing control of my own narrative. The Italy trip embodied everything I wanted to reclaim about myself: independence, adventure, the courage to live fully despite loss. Now, in hindsight, I realized that was precisely when Brandon and Jessica launched their campaign in earnest. The phone calls grew more frequent, each accompanied by a new financial crisis demanding immediate attention. Jessica's mysterious health ailments requiring expensive treatments, Brandon's car troubles that couldn't wait for his next paycheck. I'd offered small amounts here and there, rationalizing it as temporary assistance, assuring myself they'd repay me. But each request became larger, more urgent, more emotionally manipulative, and I, desperate to feel needed by my son, succumbed to every lie. The cruel irony was that they'd trained me to be their personal ATM, exploiting my own love against me. Every dollar I gave them served as validation that I was a good mother, a supportive family member, someone worth keeping around. I believed I was buying their affection, but in reality, I was funding my own betrayal. That's when I realized the depth of their deception. The fateful call came on a Tuesday morning as I was reviewing my Italy packing list. Brandon's voice was shaky, laced with a panic I'd never heard before. My maternal instincts took over instantly, pushing aside the nagging doubts that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "Mom, I need your help," he said without introduction. "Jessica's in serious trouble." I set down my coffee cup, my full attention focused on his every word. "What kind of trouble?" "She owes money to some very dangerous people. Gambling debts." The words landed like a physical blow. Gambling debts. Jessica had never mentioned gambling beyond the occasional lottery ticket purchase, but the sheer terror in Brandon's voice was palpable, and my son had never been a skilled liar. Or so I'd believed. "How much money?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer would be devastating. 13,000. His voice cracked. Mom, I know it's a lot, but these people, they're not playing games. They showed up at our house yesterday. Jessica's been hiding in the bedroom ever since. $13,000, almost exactly the amount I had saved for Italy. The coincidence should have raised a red flag, but my mind was too consumed with fear for my family to think rationally. Vivid images of Jessica being harmed, of my son helpless to protect his wife, eclipsed any logical skepticism. Brandon, have you contacted the police? Brandon replied, his voice thick with despair. And tell them what? That my wife owes money to loan sharks? They'll dismiss it as a civil matter until someone gets hurt. Mom, I'm scared. Really scared. I could hear him crying, struggling to maintain composure. My strong, capable son, reduced to tears by circumstances beyond his control. The sound broke something within me. This was my child, my baby boy, who used to seek comfort in my arms when nightmares plagued his sleep. If he needed me, I would move mountains to help him. Okay, I heard myself saying. Okay, we'll find a way to resolve this. How did Jessica even get entangled with these people? It started small, Brandon explained. Online poker, sports betting. She said she was just having fun, blowing off steam, but then she started losing, and instead of stopping, she kept doubling down, trying to recoup her losses. You know how she gets when she's stressed. I knew that Jessica had always been prone to impulsive shopping sprees when upset, to making rash decisions when feeling overwhelmed. It wasn't difficult to imagine her spiraling out of control with gambling. People made poor choices when they were struggling. The men who came to the house yesterday weren't exactly subtle, Brandon continued. They made it very clear what would happen if Jessica doesn't pay. Mom, I can't lose her. I can't. The desperation in his voice sealed my fate. This was no longer about money. It was about safeguarding my family. The Italy trip suddenly seemed selfish, trivial compared to my daughter-in-law's safety. I could always take another vacation, but I couldn't replace Jessica if something happened to her. I have some savings, I said hesitantly. The money I'd set aside for my trip. Mom, I can't ask you to sacrifice Italy for us. But he wasn't truly protesting, was he? If he had genuinely opposed taking my vacation money, he would have ended the call and sought an alternative solution. Instead, he waited in silence as I convinced myself to relinquish my dreams for their crisis. Family comes first, I said, echoing the values Harold and I had instilled in him. Italy will still be there next year. Mom, you're saving our lives. I promise we'll repay you as soon as possible, with interest. Of course they would. Brandon was a good son, raised with strong morals. He understood the value of money and the importance of upholding promises. This was simply a temporary emergency, a one-time crisis demanding extraordinary measures. I should have demanded proof, photographs of the menacing men, copies of the debt documentation, something tangible beyond my son's frantic phone call. But I was too preoccupied with being the mother he needed me to be, too focused on playing my part in their drama to ask the tough questions. I'll transfer the money today, I promised. But Brandon, Jessica needs to seek help for this gambling problem. This cannot happen again. Absolutely. We've already researched counseling programs. She's going to get the help she needs. Such reasonable words, such sensible plans. My son sounded as though he had everything under control except for this unfortunate situation. I felt proud of him for handling the crisis so maturely, for protecting his wife while simultaneously taking steps to prevent future problems. I ended the call feeling like a hero, the good mother who'd stepped up when her family needed her most. Yes, I'd have to postpone my Italian adventure, but wasn't sacrifice an integral part of love? Harold would have undoubtedly done the same had he been alive. Within an hour, I transferred $13,000 to Brandon's account and contacted my travel agent to cancel my trip. The cancellation fees were considerable, but compared to Jessica's safety, money seemed inconsequential. I spent the remainder of the day feeling righteously satisfied with my decision. When Margaret called that evening, I recounted the family emergency with the solemnity of someone who'd averted a catastrophe. Gambling debts? Margaret's voice conveyed skepticism. Since when does Jessica gamble? Apparently, it started small and spiraled out of control. It happens to more people than you'd think. And these debt collectors just happened to demand precisely the amount you had saved for Italy. Margaret, I know what you're implying, but Brandon was genuinely terrified. You should have heard his voice. If you say so, honey. I just hope those two appreciate what you've given up for them. I was certain they would. How could they not? I'd literally saved Jessica's life and salvaged their marriage. They'd likely spend the rest of their lives expressing gratitude for my sacrifice. I had no inkling that I was about to commit the biggest blunder of my life. The thank you text from Brandon arrived 3 hours after I'd transferred the funds. Mom, you're an angel. Jessica's safe now. We love you so much. Short, sweet, and precisely what I needed to hear. For the first time in days, I felt as though I could breathe freely. My family was safe, and I'd been the one to protect them. The Italy money was gone, but Jessica would be alive to thank me in person. I spent the next few days in a strange state of emotional limbo. A part of me mourned the loss of my Italian adventure, but a larger part felt genuinely proud of my actions. When people inquired about my upcoming trip, I spoke of the family emergency with the quiet dignity of someone who'd made a noble sacrifice. Margaret remained unconvinced. She continued to drop by with increasingly pointed questions about Jessica's mysterious gambling addiction and the suspiciously convenient timing of the crisis. But I was determined to afford Brandon and Jessica the benefit of the doubt. Family loyalty was paramount, even if it cost me my dream vacation. At least they'll repay you with interest, Margaret remarked during one of her visits. Although I haven't heard any specific timelines for when that might happen. They need time to recover financially, I defended. $13,000 is a significant sum to repay quickly. It's also a significant sum to lose gambling, particularly for someone who supposedly just began playing online poker. I changed the subject, but Margaret's words lingered in my mind. When exactly had Jessica started gambling? Brandon had been vague about the timeline, and I realized I'd never actually heard Jessica express any interest in poker or sports betting. Still, people had private hobbies, didn't they? Perhaps she was embarrassed about her newfound pastime. Nevertheless, curiosity eventually got the better of me. On Thursday, I called Brandon to inquire about their well-being in the aftermath of the crisis. His phone went straight to voicemail. I attempted Jessica's number with the same result. By Friday, I was beginning to worry again. What if the debt collectors had returned? What if $13,000 hadn't been sufficient? Saturday morning brought another text from Brandon. Taking Jessica away for a few days to help her decompress from the stress. Thanks again for everything, Mom. You saved our marriage. A short getaway sounded therapeutic. Jessica had endured a traumatic experience, and Brandon was being a supportive husband by helping her recover somewhere peaceful. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction thinking about how my sacrifice had facilitated their healing. It wasn't until Monday that I began to feel genuinely uneasy. Still no phone calls, no updates on Jessica's recovery, and no mention of their plans for counseling. When I drove past their house, I noticed their mail was piling up and their lawn sprinkler system wasn't running. That was uncharacteristic of Brandon, who was normally meticulous about home maintenance. Tuesday afternoon, I succumbed to my anxieties and called Brandon's office. His assistant sounded surprised to hear from me. "Oh, Mrs. Richardson, didn't Brandon inform you? He took 2 weeks of vacation time. He said it was a last-minute family situation." 2 weeks. Brandon had never taken 2 consecutive weeks off in his entire career. He was the type who checked emails even on his sick days. Something about this prolonged absence felt amiss. Did he mention their destination? Not specifically, but he seemed excited about it. He mentioned it was a once-in-a-lifetime trip. A once-in-a-lifetime trip. The phrase struck me like a physical blow. That's precisely how I'd described Italy to anyone who would listen. My once-in-a-lifetime trip that I'd sacrificed to save Jessica from imaginary debt collectors. I drove directly to Margaret's house, likely breaking several traffic laws in the process. She took one look at my face and poured me a glass of wine without even asking what was wrong. "They're gone," I said abruptly. Brandon took 2 weeks off work for a once-in-a-lifetime trip that he never mentioned to me. Margaret set down her own glass, her expression hardening. Gone where? I have no idea, but I'm starting to suspect they used my money for their own vacation while I'm sitting here worrying about Jessica's gambling debts that probably never existed. Oh, honey. Margaret's expression conveyed a mix of sympathy and outrage. What are you planning to do? I'm going to discover exactly where they went and what they did with my money. It took less than an hour of online sleuthing to uncover what I sought. Jessica, bless her heart, had never encountered a social media platform she didn't adore. Her Instagram account was set to private, but her Facebook page was wide open for public viewing. The photos I discovered would alter everything. The first photo appeared in my Facebook feed at exactly 3:47 p.m. on Wednesday, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. Jessica, radiant in a flowing white sundress, standing at the bow of a cruise ship with the Mediterranean sparkling behind her. The caption read, "Living the dream on our surprise cruise. Couldn't be more grateful for this amazing husband." My hands shook as I scrolled through the rest. Brandon feeding Jessica chocolate-covered strawberries by the pool. Jessica posing with a champagne flute against a sunset that could only be the Greek islands. Brandon in a tuxedo at what appeared to be a formal dinner, grinning as though he'd won the lottery, which, in a way, he had. $13,000 of my meticulously saved Italy money had purchased them a luxurious Mediterranean cruise, the very cruise I'd researched months earlier and dismissed as too extravagant for my budget. They were literally experiencing my dream vacation, while I sat in my kitchen in Portland, staring at my empty savings account and feeling like the world's biggest fool. The most infuriating aspect was Jessica's obvious joy in every photo. This wasn't a woman recovering from trauma or battling dangerous debt collectors. This was a woman celebrating what she clearly considered the greatest achievement of her life. She'd manipulated her mother-in-law out of $13,000 and was documenting her victory for the world to admire. I scrolled back through her photos from the past month, searching for any indication of the gambling problem that had supposedly threatened her life. Nothing. No mentions of poker nights, no sports betting references, no signs of the stress and fear that Brandon had described so convincingly, only the typical stream of restaurant meals, shopping excursions, and complaints about being bored. My phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and I answered without thinking. "Olivia, are you all right? You seemed agitated when you left here." "They're on a cruise," I said, my voice eerily calm. "A Mediterranean cruise that I financed while they convinced me it was to save Jessica from loan sharks." The silence on Margaret's end spoke volumes. When she finally responded, her voice was tight with anger. "Those conniving little thieves, how could Brandon do this to you?" "I don't know." But even as I uttered the words, I realized that wasn't entirely true. I did know. I simply hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. Brandon had been testing my boundaries for years, requesting money with increasingly elaborate stories. The car requiring emergency repairs, Jessica's medical bills that insurance inexplicably wouldn't cover, the business opportunity demanding immediate investment. Each time, I'd written the check and believed his explanation because I desperately wanted to believe my son was a good man who had simply encountered bad luck. But good men don't steal their mothers' dream vacations. Good men don't traumatize their mothers with fabricated stories about their wives being threatened by criminals. Good men don't document their fraudulent activities on social media while their victims sit at home consumed with worry for their safety. "What do you intend to do?" Margaret asked. I stared at the latest photo Jessica had posted, her and Brandon toasting each other at dinner, both looking tanned, relaxed, and completely satisfied with their deception. The caption read, "So grateful for my husband's spontaneous surprise trip. Life is good." Surprise trip. Of course, that's how she'd portray it. Jessica likely had no idea her husband had stolen the money from his mother. In her mind, Brandon was the generous husband who'd spontaneously whisked her away on a romantic cruise. She was able to play the grateful wife while I played the fool. "I'm going to make them pay," I said quietly, the words laced with resolve. "Good. Would you like me to come over?" "Not yet. I need to think about this, to carefully consider the best approach. After I ended the call, I sat in my kitchen, fixated on those photos until my eyes ached. The rage was building gradually, like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. These people had looked me directly in the eye and lied without remorse. They'd exploited my love for Brandon against me, weaponized my desire to help family, transformed my generosity into their personal windfall. The old Olivia would have contacted Brandon immediately, sobbing and demanding answers. She would have given him the opportunity to weave another fabricated story, to manipulate her emotions once more, to somehow portray this betrayal as a mere misunderstanding. But the woman studying the evidence of her son's theft felt something entirely different, a cold, calculated fury that demanded more than tears and confrontations. They'd treated me like a fool, stolen my dreams, and flaunted their victory as though it were something to celebrate. If they wanted to play games with my money, I was going to teach them a lesson about consequences they'd never forget. So, as Olivia sits there steeping in righteous anger, it's clear this isn't just about the money. It's about respect, about betrayal, and about a woman reclaiming her power after being taken for granted. This story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and it shows us that even after devastating disappointment, there's always an opportunity to rise stronger and more determined than ever. And trust me, Olivia has a plan. Part 2 is going to be very interesting. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a similar situation, or do you have any advice for Olivia as she embarks on this next chapter? Leave a comment below. I always enjoy reading your perspectives, and if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 2. We'll be diving deeper into Olivia's strategy and seeing just how she plans to turn the tables on Brandon and Jessica. Plus, I have a lot more exciting stories and reflections coming your way. So, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.